Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here and welcome to my review of iFi Pro iCAN Signature. This is the flagship amplifier from iFi, which I have bought with my own money from Audi 46. And I wanted to get this in because I really wanted a small amplifier on my desk because I was sort of done using speaker amps, which I'll get into in this review. And I got this in to drive my Hyphamansos Vara and my Abyss 1266 Phi TC, and also my Utopia and my other headphones. So I'll talk about how this amplifier drives all these headphones, in particular the four that I just mentioned. And yeah, so the form factor was a major reason why I got this in, and the output power. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let me just talk about how this review will be structured. In the first part of the review, I'll talk about its specs, its features, and all that, and its ease of use, and how I use it, my use case, etc. In the second part of the review, I'll talk about its general sound signature, and in the final part, I'll talk about how this was driving four headphones that I have in front of me: the 6XX, the Abyss AB 1266 Phi TC, and my Focal Utopia, and my Hyphamansos Vara, which I have over here. All right. So very interesting gold accents going on here, which some people have pointed out is perhaps too blingy for them. It's not too blingy for me. I'm okay with the gold accents. I don't mind the gold silver contrast on the front plate. It does distinguish it from the previous OG model. So one of the things iFi has mentioned that they've done with this model is that they have quietened down this amp, so to speak. It's even more low noise, and it ships with an iFi iPower Elite, which is a pretty handy power adapter, which has some of iFi's best noise cancellation and some of the best sort of power supply technology. And in terms of its inputs and outputs, if we start with the back, so this is of course where the power adapter goes in, the DC loop out, and the ESL link. These two are meant to be used in conjunction with the iFi Pro IESL, which is of course the energizer iFi also makes, so that you can use electrostats with this. And I can vouch for the fact that IESL, which is no longer available in the primary market, at least you can buy it used, in combination with this amp sounds amazing, because this has a lot of bass, which I'll get into, which a lot of E-stats need. Of course, it has a lot of inputs. So you have three RCA inputs, you have one set of XLR inputs, and it's a pleasure, honestly, because I have AB DACs with this. So if you can see this, there's 1, 2, 3, and then balanced. And finally, yeah, so four inputs. Four inputs is, I think, quite amazing, because I have AB as many as 3 DACs in one go with this, which was wonderful because, I love ABing stuff, and this is pretty handy for that. So in many ways, this is a wonderful reviewer tool as well. So to get back to a discussion on this, you also see the balanced and single-ended output, so you can use this as a preamp. That is something iFi is proud of, because this preamp, when used as a preamp, will still retain the signature that you are able to create using, let's say, the X bass boost or the 3D holography stuff that they have going on. So using these two features, you can color up the sound to your liking, and then the preamp will of course pass on that sound signature to your power amp or your other amplification device. In terms of its front plate, it's quite amazing, like I said. So it has 4 inputs. This X bass is a godsend, honestly, with so many of my headphones. This X bass has 3 selectable options: 10 Hz, 20 Hz, and 40 Hz. So the 10 Hz you use if you want more sub bass in around and downwards from 40 Hz, and then you can go all the way up to the 40 Hz marking, which says 40 Hz, but then it actually corrects for mid bass. So this is something you use if your headphone has a roll off around 160 Hz. So the last notch on this, which says 40 Hz, actually takes care of mid bass and not sub bass. So you don't want to use this if your headphone already has a decent amount of mid bass, because otherwise it might become too boomy. But you can play around with this, and it does really work. So this sort of bass analog EQ I've often preferred to digital EQ, and the differences in sonic performance is pretty evident. And this is honestly one of the best reasons. This knob is one of the best knobs in the hobby. This is one of the reasons for getting this amplifier. Finally, you have the tube mode. So the solid state mode is of course what I've kept this at, and I prefer the solid state mode greatly because I find this amp colored to start with, and I don't need any more coloration. But if you wanted to, you could use the tube mode by bringing the slider here and then tube plus to make this even more warm and more laid back. And I'll talk about the sound signatures when I talk about the sound signature in a bit. These are of course headphone outputs, so these are dual XLR, but you can use them as single-ended quarter-inch headphone outputs. And this is of course the 4-pin balanced XLR. I greatly have preferred this output to these two because I felt that this has a cleaner treble, so to speak, a slightly more polite treble. And finally, you have IE match both with the single-ended 3.5 and the 4.4 balanced here, which is very nifty because I've driven IMs with this and it does sound amazing. You do sacrifice just a bit of bass, I felt, when you use these with the IE match. And finally, this of course is to adjust the 3D staging of your headphone or your speakers, and it does work. It's not just a gimmick, but I've often not used it because I've often felt that I didn't like the coloration or the sort of changes that the soundstage adjustment brought to my listening experience. And last but not the least, the volume pot is weighty, feels super premium and nice. 14 watts would better be weighty because you don't want to sort of burn your headphone drivers or blow your drivers by having this be too smooth. All right, so that's it. I've talked about the tube, and that's it for the specs. If you want to talk about the sound of the iFi Pro iCAN signature, I feel like a lot of other iFi devices, it's warm and it's thick. However, what I feel is interesting is that it has a bit of a forward mid-range. So it's not like it's a peaky upper mid-range. It's an overall forward presentation, which I felt works really well with a lot of headphones, which I'll get into in the synergy section. The bass is wonderful, and I feel like the bass correction system that they have here does make a world of difference because I love it with my Susvara. The Susvara becomes very punchy. I've even loved it with my AT6 SE, which makes the headphone even more punchy. And the soundstage holography thing is not my cup of tea, but of course some people love it. And last but not the least, the tube modes. The tube modes somehow I feel like take away a bit of clarity from the presentation. So even the tube mode, not to say nothing of the tube plus mode, take a bit away from the clarity of the presentation. So that wasn't my cup of tea. I often felt that the tube mode makes the sound of the Pro iCAN signature somewhat veiled. Overall, it's a thick, warm, color sounding amplifier, and I have loved it. In terms of now to talk about how each of my headphones worked with it. So first and foremost, I got this Pro iCAN signature and I bought it to drive my Abyss AB1266 Phi TC, which is very picky in terms of its synergy. And I was using an Accuphase E380 until that time. An Accuphase E380 is a very high-end speaker amp. It goes for around $8,000, I think. And in some places, it's even more expensive. I've used the Accuphase. I've used a Pass Lab setup, a $12,000 Pass Lab setup, because I wanted to eke out the maximum performance technically from the Abyss and from my Susvara. Although the Pass Lab setup that I had and the Accuphase amplifier that I had have very distinct sound signatures. Accuphase is more neutral, whereas the Pass is more laid back and warm. I felt that the TC has a slightly recessed mid-range, which I hope to cover in a separate review for the TC, which I've never done, incidentally. It is one of my favorite headphones, but I've never done a single review for this. A TC mid-range is recessed. There's just no way of getting around it. I recall that when I first got my Susvara in, and I was somewhat hating on the TC because that was a long time ago, and a lot of TC fans were offended by the fact that I said that the TC mid-range is somewhat recessed. But then since then, the same TC fans, I feel like, have A/B the TC with other headphones that have more forward mid-range, like a DCX Stealth, and have come to the same conclusion. It's not just me, other people have also picked up on it. The TC mid-range being recessed is something that I feel like doesn't do vocals justice. The TC is not a headphone that I've liked with vocals for a long time. This was my specialist heavy metal rock headphone, which, kind of bothered me because I wanted to not switch headphones and I didn't want to have a listening session with just metal and rock. I wanted to combine all kinds of genres when listening to music. So what happened is I recalled trying this with the original Pro iCAN and getting a pretty nice signature. So I got this in, and lo and behold, it fixes the TC mid-range. It's not the final word in driving the TC. And I know a lot of you will jump on this and talk about how the Woo Audio WA-33 stock, elite, whatever, does more to get the TC to be more slammy, to be more resolving, to be more wide and deep, etc. And I agree. This is not the final word in terms of eking out the last bit of technical performance from the TC. My speaker amp, my Accuphase speaker amp, I feel did way more than any model of WA-33 or Woo Audio WA-33, what have you. So I know what you mean. There are things the TC can do which even this high-powered device cannot get it to do. And by that I mean a really wide stage, perhaps slightly better layering and more resolution. And a lot more slam the TC is capable of on certain speaker amps and perhaps high-end headphone amps. That being said, those improvements that the TC is capable of undergoing with the right sort of amplification, to me, are not as important as the improvement I get, tonally speaking, with this. Because even on this, the TC is so resolving, so wide, so powerful and slammy that I honestly can easily forego on the last bit of resolution, the last bit of slam, the last bit of soundstage enhancement and all that you get with the higher end amp than this $2,000 device. People like driving the TC with $8,000 amps, with $10,000 amps, with $20,000 amps. I have tried all that. I have owned all that. I have come to my own peace with this because the tonality here, the synergy and tonality make the TC a better all-rounder for me. So this is honestly currently my favorite amplifier driving the TC because this brings the TC mid-range forward. I can add a bit of bass boost even to the TC's existing wonderful bass and get more slam and punch, more energy. I love it. So I highly recommend this with the TC. Again, like I said, it's not the final word in eking out technical performance from the TC, but honestly, like, how much difference does that make to your listening experience in terms of that added bit of 0.1% or 1% or 5% more resolution is subjective. It's way too subjective for me, and I don't care for that extra added bit of resolution or stage, what have you. And I don't get the same kind of warmth with the Woo Audio Wah 33. I get an overall warm experience, which is lovely with the TC. A certain sweetness in the vocals, which is lovely. This amplifier is like adding EQ to the TC. It's like actually bringing the mid-range forward, and it's not the kind of effect I've ever had with any other amplifier, guys. The only amplifier that I've not tried with the TC is the Primavera Trafomatic, which is supposed to be amazing and all that. So that's there. And I've not tried the Felix Audio Envy with the TC, but you know, so just to disclaim, but not having tried those two super high-end amps, this is my favorite amp. The Utopia wasn't as great with this though, because I talk about the fact that it's warm, but I feel like the warmth here comes from lower mid-range and bass with the with this device. It's not from the treble because it does nothing to smoothen or hide the treble. It does nothing to, you know, mellow the treble. The Utopia can have a sharp treble. It's a very aggressive headphone. It's a very in-your-face presentation, narrow soundstage, a lot of resolution. So some people I know do not like the Utopia for its forwardness. Others love it. I have talked about how much I love it, so that's there. But this was not the best pairing because despite its warmth in its lower mid-range and its bass, this does nothing to the Utopia treble. Off the single-ended, the Utopia treble sounds sharp and unlistenable after a while. I needed to EQ the Utopia a lot to listen to this. So it's not all, you know, hunky-dory with this. And in terms of bass, of course, you can fill out the Utopia sort of sub-bass roll-off with like bass boost here, so that's there. Utopia slams a lot on this, so that's there. But overall, I would not recommend the Pro iCAN Signature for driving the Utopia because the treble is not the best. Off single-ended, it's certainly not the best. Off balance, it's better, but it's still sharp and it's still somewhat, I feel, abrasive. I think abrasive is the right word for the Utopia treble of this Pro iCAN. All right, that takes care of the Utopia. The Sennheiser HD6XX works so well with the Pro iCAN. Yeah, so this is one headphone. Like I said, it does scale with better quality amplification. It worked really well with my EF400 from HiFiman, which I reviewed in the past, just before this, honestly. And yeah, and this headphone also works really well of other high-end amps. So you don't have to go all the way up to an OTL like I do. I have a Felix Audio Euphoria on which this is magnificent. The Pro iCAN Signature works really well with the HD6XX. It sounds like it retains its body. You can add the bass boost to this, which works really well. This amplifier does nothing to smoothen out or hide the treble. As a matter of fact, I feel like the forwardness does bring out the treble a bit, and especially around mid-treble. So this is, I think, benefited from that sort of treble lift is not the right expression, from that slight treble forwardness. Overall, great synergy. The 6XX enjoys with the Pro iCAN. Of course, it's a $200 headphone, and you might not want to get a $2,000 amplifier to drive a $200 headphone. But in case you have this in your collection and you have other high-end headphones, I just thought it's worth sharing. And last but certainly not the least, the Susvara sounds pretty great on this. The Susvara takes on whatever chain you feed it with. So my DAC, for example, I've had DAC issues with the Susvara, which is one of the reasons why I sold Susvara. My particular DAC issue had to do with the fact that my favorite DAC, the Holo Audio May, which I have on NOS mode, which I was using a lot, sounds a bit soft. So that softness is not super evident if you're using like headphones like the TC or the Utopia or even the 6XX. But the softness, I do feel like somehow doesn't combine well with the Susvara, and overall they accentuate each other's softness perhaps. So the Susvara sounds overly laid back of the Holo Audio May. Until I fixed the chain by adding HQ Player, the upsampling software. And this really sort of hardened up the sound of the Susvara, which made it a lot nicer. So the Susvara works great of the Holo Audio May, and with this in the chain, the effect was the Susvara became more forward, which I liked, and the X bass was magic with the Susvara because that sub bass accentuation gave this that sort of sub bass kick, and honestly made this a lot more fun. So in summary, I highly recommend this if you have a Susvara or an Abyss TC. It is currently my favorite amplifier driving the Susvara and the Abyss TC. If you gave me a Woo Audio WA-33 and this, and were equally priced, I would get this. I kid you not. The WA-33, of course, has a massive audiophile prestige. There's no getting around that. This hobby has a lot to do with prestige for certain people, and I completely understand that. And why not, right? We buy expensive watches and stuff, and that a lot of that has to do with prestige. A Woo Audio WA-33, when you buy that, you buy into the prestige. You buy into that stately aesthetic. The WA-33 looks majestic, a lot more majestic than this. The WA-33 will resolve better. The WA-33 will do a lot more things that this cannot. However, the tonality of this, I feel like, is not something I can ever now go back on. The tonality of this is just amazing with the Susvara. This X bass boost is not something the WA-33 has, or any other headphone amplifier that I know that can drive a Susvara and a TC has to this level of adjustment. And honestly, it is my favorite amplifier right now for the Susvara and the TC. So because of that, I'm very happy and very grateful that I own it and I love it. And a big shout out to iFi for this wonderful device. So that's it for now, guys. I might revisit this review later and talk about this amplifier in comparison to other amplifiers. I do want to say very quickly that I did own the DAC with this, the Pro IDSD, which I didn't like. It was veiled. It was not the same level of performance that I feel like I've read about or I've seen other reviews where it's likened to like $10,000 amps and stuff, and it's DACs and stuff, and it's really not that great. The Pro IDSD was a very quick catch and release for me. It wasn't my cup of tea. This was my cup of tea, and I love it, and I highly recommend it. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope this was useful, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye-bye.